When you picture an archaeologist, what actually comes to mind? You're probably thinking of someone carefully brushing dust off a piece of ancient pottery in Pompeii, right? Or maybe opening up a centuries-old Viking grave to decode the mysteries of the distant past. We're so conditioned to think of archaeology as the study of the dead, of civilizations that are long gone. But what if we took those exact same tools, those precise methods of unearthing the past, and applied them to the living? What if we used archaeology to understand the resilient, breathing human beings surviving in our world right now? Traditionally, we view this field through the lens of ancient artifacts, but contemporary archaeology looks at something entirely different. We're talking about present-day mud stoves and everyday objects in modern Zimbabwe. This is a fascinating field called contemporary archaeology. By looking really closely at how everyday things are made, who is making them, and exactly how they're used today, we can uncover incredibly vital human stories. You see, official written records and government documents, they often totally miss the reality on the ground, especially for marginalized people. Contemporary archaeology bypasses that official narrative by examining the tangible, physical evidence of how people are living, adapting, and surviving right in this very moment.
Okay, let's dive into this explainer. Today, we're looking at the groundbreaking R-Create project, led by Professor Per Dliffer Fredriksson from the University of Oslo. His team has been out conducting fieldwork in southern Africa, specifically looking at populations who have been displaced during really turbulent times. And honestly, what they found completely shifts the narrative on survival and resilience. Our focus today is on the unsung architects of the survival, the women who are literally building the future.
Here is our roadmap for today. First, the archaeology of our time. Second, the women building the future. Third, new materials require new solutions. Fourth, defiance and mobile ancestors. And finally, the family tree of crafts. All right, let's start with Section 1, Archaeology of Our Time, Contextualizing the Crisis. To really grasp the magnitude of what these people are doing, we have to ground our understanding in the historical context of forced displacement in Zimbabwe. This isn't just an abstract concept. This is a harsh reality that has uprooted thousands of lives, forcing entire communities to start completely from scratch in completely unfamiliar territories. The recent history of this displacement breaks down into three distinct waves. First, around the year 2000, there were mass displacements under the Mugabe regime. Then, a decade later in 2010, a second wave of people actually relocated voluntarily because of a massive new dam project. But the third wave, in 2014, was a sudden, devastating forced displacement caused by severe floods tied directly to that very same dam. Today, people from all three of these waves live in defined areas right next to each other. For an archaeologist, this creates an incredibly unique, real-time opportunity to study how different groups of humans adapt to trauma and a completely new life. So, the crucial point is the sheer lack of resources given to this newest wave of displaced people. Before they were forced to move by the floods, the government promised them substantial plots of land to rebuild their lives, around 4 to 5 hectares per family. But the reality? It was brutally different. They ended up with tiny, fragmented patches of land measuring just 1 single hectare. Just imagine trying to sustain your entire family, grow food, and build a new life on a fraction of the space you were promised. That's the harsh reality they woke up to.
Moving on to Section 2, the women building the future, the invisible builders.
You know, when a community is completely uprooted and just dumped onto a tiny, unfamiliar patch of land, how does society actually rebuild? If you just look at official power structures, you might think the local leaders or politicians are doing the heavy lifting. But the physical evidence, the actual archaeology on the ground, tells a completely different story about the invisible builders of this new world. Professor Fredriksson sums this up perfectly. He points out that while a lot of academics and officials have written about these massive political displacements, almost everyone has overlooked the actual people who physically built everything in the new settlement. As he says, that is, of course, women. The women are the true unsung heroes here. When the official records ignore them, the physical structures they built with their own hands demand to be recognized. They are absolutely the vital architects of their community's survival. Which brings us to Section 3. New materials require new solutions. Reactivating latent knowledge.
It's one thing to have the skills to build a house or craft a cooking pot in your ancestral homeland, right? You know exactly which riverbank has the good clay. But what happens when you're forced into an entirely new ecosystem? It's like a giant puzzle. These women faced a massive, immediate challenge. They were completely at the mercy of whatever raw materials were available in this new, restricted 1-hectare space. They had to rapidly map new landscapes and test the properties of completely unfamiliar mud and clay. They had to figure out how to build new ovens for heating, safe vessels for cooking, and durable pots for storage. To do this, they didn't just invent things from thin air. They reactivated what we call latent knowledge. They took the traditional techniques passed down through generations and heavily adapted them to work with these new, stubborn raw materials. Their profound knowledge of craftsmanship literally ensured their families didn't starve or freeze.
Let's move to Section 4 and see how this builds into defiance and mobile ancestors.
Because survival is just the first step. What Professor Fredrickson's team found next goes way beyond basic necessities. It enters the realm of profound physical rebellion and brilliant cultural adaptation. See, the authorities gave the newest wave of displaced people a very strict order. You are not allowed to build permanent structures. You must keep things temporary. But the displaced people, particularly the women doing the building, outright rejected this. They engaged in what we can call a permanent rebellion. They gathered solid stone and built heavy permanent toilet and shower constructions. Building these solid stone structures wasn't just about hygiene, it was a loud, defiant protest. It was their way of stamping their existence into the earth and saying, we are here and we are built to stay.
And this created a really striking contrast. On one hand, we have their physical defiance, building in solid stone to protest the rules. On the other, we see a heartbreakingly pragmatic cultural adaptation. Because they were forced to leave their ancestral graves behind, and because they know deep down that the government might force them to move again, they couldn't establish fixed permanent shrines for their ancestors. So instead, they adapted their religious and cultural practices into a mobile ancestor cult. They began crafting portable, physical objects to house their ancestor spirits. They made their heritage mobile. This way, if the trucks arrive tomorrow to move them again, their ancestors can just be packed up and carried right along with them.
Finally, Section 5, the family tree of crafts, or tracing craft genealogy. Now you might be wondering, okay, so how does studying mud stoves in Zimbabwe today help the broader field of archaeology? Well, by studying these women's specific crafting methods, how they shape the clay, how they decorate their pots, and where they learn these techniques, archaeologists are developing a revolutionary new way to track history. And this brilliantly illustrates the concept of craft genealogy. In contemporary Zimbabwe, researchers are mapping mud and clay pottery techniques to understand recent human displacement. But get this, Professor Fredrickson's team is taking these exact same methodologies used to study the women in Zimbabwe and applying them to ancient ironwork traditions in 500s Norway. They aren't building a family tree of bloodlines or kings, they're building a family tree of building techniques. By tracking how a specific way of twisting iron or shaping clay is passed down, they can map historical kinship and see exactly how different material cultures are related across vast stretches of time. It's absolutely fascinating.
Which brings us to a final thought. Every single year, millions of people around the globe are displaced by politics, climate change, and conflict. The stories of the women in Zimbabwe remind us that human resilience isn't just found in history books. It's physically baked into the mud, stone, and wood of the present day. So I want to leave you with this question. If a contemporary archaeologist were to dig through your life right now, what would your everyday objects say about you? What latent knowledge, what quiet acts of defiance, and what adaptations are hidden in your own modern material culture? Think about that, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.